Denver. Thanks, Dan. I want to get right to Senator Rand Paul. He's a Republican from Kentucky who's supporting Mitt Romney. He's got a new book out. It's called Government Bullies: How Everyday Americans Are Being Harassed, Abused, and Imprisoned by the Feds. I was almost afraid to open it when I started reading it. But let's start by talking.
No, it's good. It's good.
It's
you
very
need to
good.
Open it.
Let's talk a little bit about the debate last night. I know you had the option of going to the Yankees game with your son or watching the debate, and you chose.
What I can tell you for certain is that the Yankees kicked butt last night. So.
And if you look at the poll numbers, I think some people would say, and Governor Romney as well.
Governor Romney didn't need me last night. He did great. And I have seen some of the highlights, and I'm pretty impressed with his performance. We
heard Dan Lothian report just a moment ago from talking sort of about the White House spin, if you will, this morning. They're saying it's not going to shift the race dramatically. Do you agree that sort of one-night performance in a debate to play it up as being a game changer is not correct?
Well, about 90 to 95% of Americans have decided. There's about 5% less, and so nothing really changes dramatically, but you're trying to shift the 4, 5, 6, 7% of the vote that might shift at this point. I think most everybody else is pretty much set on where they're going to go. So you are shooting for a small amount of people, some in the middle. But interestingly, people are always talking about the middle. There's people on both extremes. You remember when Ralph Nader took votes? You know, libertarians take votes. So really, they need to be worried also about the people on either side of the spectrum as well.
So you think it might be more open than just that 5% we always talk about?
It's still a small number. It's still a pretty small number.
You know, Senator, I watch you every day on Capitol Hill trying to get people to give specifics about what they're going to really do to reduce the deficit. And Mitt Romney is not giving specifics on what he's going to do specifically on reforming the tax code.
Right.
Does he need to do that, do a better job of that?
In his defense, what I would say is the tax code is enormously complicated, and so you do have to talk somewhat in generalities. He wants to make the rates lower, he wants to make the tax code simpler, and he is for having less deductions or cuts. But what I would say is that both of them missed last night is this: when everybody's like, can you pay for it, will you add to the debt? He has a general philosophy that he's not going to add to the debt with tax cuts. But another way not to add to the debt, why don't you cut spending? So, I mean, you can make something revenue neutral by cutting spending. Cut spending.
And let's dig into that a little bit more, because you've said you wouldn't vote for any plan, Republican or a Democratic plan, that doesn't balance the budget. And what you're certainly, in that specific example, we're nowhere close to enough of a definite plan to be able to.
But it'll be hashed out over many months. Tax reform will be an enormous bill and an enormous package. And what I will say is, when I'm part of the process, you're right, I'm not going to vote for it if it adds trillions of dollars to the deficit. But the way we get it to do it, there's a couple of ways. You can get rid of deductions, which I am for getting rid of deductions. And if there's not enough deductions and you say still it's a good idea to reduce taxes to spur the economy, which I think it is, when the economy grew at 5 and 6% under Reagan, it's because we did significant tax reductions of the upper class. We went from a tax rate of 70 when Reagan came in to 50. Then we went from 50 to 28, and the economy grew like gangbusters. That's what we need again.
Senator, last night President Obama reminded Mitt Romney of what he said in the debates when he said that when asked if you had 10 cuts for one revenue increase, you still wouldn't support that. Isn't that part of the problem when you have Republicans who say, I won't support any type of revenue increase, and you won't even accept 10 cuts to one increase? Right. That makes no sense.
Well, I think everybody says there has to be some sort of compromise, and the narrative is that we won't compromise. I think we actually do compromise all the time. We compromise to raise military spending and to raise domestic welfare spending. What I would say the compromise is not to raise taxes. The compromise is to reduce military spending and reduce domestic spending. I think I've got some work even on my side on that, but I think the American public's ready for it.
The book is a series of stories of how people were, in many cases, like horribly maltreated by certain sort of government entities, and you rage against the TSA, and you rage against the FDA, and you rage against the EPA. So when you look at Governor Romney and you look at President Obama, you have taken exception to some of Governor Romney's plans. You have taken exception to the president's plans. Who do you think, supports what you would say in this book?
When I think of what's going on right now, I think of the Great Depression. I don't think it's as bad as the Great Depression, but I think it could be. You know, the Great Depression got worse, and then it stabilized, and people thought we were getting better, and then it got worse for another 5 or 6 years. The reason it got worse, and this is from Amity Shlaes, The Forgotten Man, her book about the Great Depression, she says the businesses were terrified of the president. and taxes were increased for 5 years in a row, and the Depression got worse and worse and worse. We've got to understand those are bad policies, but I think businesses right now are terrified of the president. So my book is about regulations, but I think it makes a big difference whether or not you have a president simply who is friendly to business in a way that he encourages business to invest. And I can tell you from meeting businessmen across the country, they're terrified.
Some people would say a bailout of the auto industry was friendly to business, a bailout of the banks was friendly to business, some businesses, right?
Friendly to failed businesses that should have gone under new ownership.
Got to ask you,
Go ahead, Will was going to jump in for a second.
Well, I wanted to ask Senator Paul one question. You said something very interesting. You pointed out during the Reagan years that tax rates were lowered, and then by actually lowering taxes on upper income earners, you helped the economy. Did it bother you, not from a political perspective, but from a principled perspective? Did it bother you last night to hear Mitt Romney talking about specifically the middle class? And I don't want to lower taxes on the upper income earners. I want to just focus on the middle class.
Well, I think everybody makes a mistake, not just the politicians, but the media pundits as well, in that who pays the taxes isn't so much important. It's where the money goes. Should the money stay with the people who earned it, or should it stay in the state of Ohio, or should it go to Washington? Where is money most efficiently spent? And can you recover an economy by hiring more government workers? Can you hire 100,000 government workers and say, oh, we're going to be better? Someone has to pay for their salaries. Government workers aren't bad people,
Didn't that sound a little bit like class division last night? Is that something
yeah,
that
it always does. It always does. It really should be about, you know, I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Should you leave the money in Bowling Green, Kentucky, or send it to Washington? Where is it most efficiently spent? And Friedman had best when Friedman said, nobody spends somebody else's money as well as they spend their own. So leave it with the people whose money it really is, and the economy will grow again. That's what we need.
Senator Rand Paul, the book is called Government Bullies, How Everyday Americans Are Being Harassed, Abused, and Imprisoned by the Feds. Nice to have you with us. Great to see you. Appreciate your time.